With tensions rising in the Middle East, the relationship between Washington and Tel Aviv faces unprecedented scrutiny. As Democrats navigate a delicate diplomatic landscape, tensions continue to escalate following Tehran's missile barrage on Israel. Speaking to reporters, Biden emphasized that the United States does not dictate Israeli actions, but merely advises, a stunning statement amid fears of a potential Israeli retaliation. Meanwhile, reports suggest diverging views between the United States and Israel on how to handle Tehran's provocations, with domestic political pressures mounting ahead of elections. The question looms: will Biden's stance change, or will it remain steadfast in a shifting geopolitical tide? Welcome to In Depth. In the high-stakes arena of international diplomacy, U.S. President Joe Biden finds himself at a crossroads with Israel's right-wing government as tensions with Iran escalate. Just days after Tehran's missile attack on Israel, Biden asserted that his government doesn't allow Israel so much as advises it. His emphasis on semantics reveals the complexities of U.S. influence over Israel. As the November elections approach, the world still wonders whether domestic political pressure will reshape America's historically unwavering support for Israel amid rising calls for a more aggressive stance against Tehran.
In a tense corridor of power, a critical dialogue unfolds between Washington and Tel Aviv as U.S. President Joe Biden navigates the complexities of U.S.-Israeli relations amid rising threats from Tehran. 2 days after Tehran's missile attack on Israel, Biden addressed reporters stating, "We don't allow Israel. We advise Israel, and nothing's going to happen today." His remarks underscore the U.S. role as both an advisor and restrained influence over Israel's military decisions. November elections approaching, questions emerge about whether Biden's stance may shift under domestic political pressure. Some speculate he could adopt a more cautious approach to avoid alienating pro-Israel voter blocs. While U.S. support for Israel has been historically steadfast, the current political climate may prompt a re-evaluation. Especially as Republicans call for a stronger response to Iran. Reports suggest growing strategic differences between Washington and Tel Aviv, with Israeli officials pushing for decisive action against Tehran's nuclear ambitions. Meanwhile, Israeli reports point to a growing rift between U.S. advisors and Israeli military ambitions. Netanyahu's right-wing government seems increasingly ready to act independently of U.S. counsel. As Biden's administration seeks to contain potential conflict, the challenge is clear. Can it curb Israeli military actions while preserving the alliance? The stakes are high, with both nations on the brink of a conflict that could reshape Middle Eastern dynamics for years.
Recent developments highlight Iran's setbacks, including the loss of military commanders in Israeli strikes and turmoil within Hezbollah. According to the Washington Post, these conventional losses could drive Iran closer to pursuing nuclear capabilities, especially after the U.S. exited the nuclear deal in 2018. Following a ballistic missile attack on Israel, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu reaffirmed the nation's resolve to retaliate. Meanwhile, Iran's supreme leader framed the missile strikes as a legitimate act of self-defense. Israeli media reports that Israel is planning a strong retaliation against Iran, vowing that they will pay with interest. Sources indicate Israel aims to place Tehran under immense pressure, with potential strikes also targeting Iraqi militias. A U.S. official reassured that Israel has its unwavering support in its military endeavors. Welcome to today's discussion on the dynamics between Washington and Tel Aviv regarding Tehran. We have two esteemed guests from Washington, Peter Rove, political columnist for Newsweek, and Paolo Pizzolo, a professor of international relations from Krakow, Poland. Thank you both for joining us in today's episode of In Depth. A very good day.
Thank you for inviting.
It's our utmost pleasure to have your input in our program. Rove, do you believe there are significant disagreements between Washington and Tel Aviv on how to approach Iran?
Well, I guess you meant that for me.
Yes, sir. Yes, I meant this for you. Did you listen to the question? Did you hear the question, or do you
hello,
need
and
me to...
it's good to be with you all. It's a little strange not to be working with translation and speaking in English, and I naturally paused. And I apologize to our viewers.
It's okay, sir. I'll repeat the question again. Do you believe there are significant disagreements between Washington and Tel Aviv on how to approach Iran?
I don't believe there are significant disagreements. I think there are disagreements on the margin regarding the intensity of Israel's response to Hezbollah and Hamas, and possibly to the government in Iran directly. I do not think that there is a window of any significance regarding the ability or the right of Israel to respond to what Israel believes is a provocation.
Do you think it's a provocation, sir?
It's hard to look at October 7 and not conclude that that was a provocation that went outside Gaza onto what the world recognizes as Israeli soil. There are hostages being held, including a few Americans. So I think that most Americans would agree that October 7 was a provocation that set the latest set of incidents in motion.
And if we go back before October the 7th, sir?
Well, it depends on how far you want to go back. You could go back 10 years, you could go back 50 years, you could go back 5,000 years.
What about the civilians in Gaza and the women and the children, the loss of humanitarian aid and everything that's taking place from your own perspective?
I think that the loss of innocent life is unacceptable, and that we all accept that it's unacceptable, but it occurs on both sides.
Okay, sir.
That's the view here of most people in the United States, that it does occur on both sides, that no one has clean hands. And the United States should be acting as an honest broker, trying to secure a lasting peace that will allow Israeli and Arab, Jewish and Muslim families to live together side by side peacefully and attain everything that the Creator God intends for them to have.
Okay, sir, putting into consideration everything that you've been saying, don't you see that the United States is putting Israeli interests before the interests of the United States to secure support of pro-Israeli lobbies in favor of Democrats in the U.S., of course, upcoming elections?
I think that should come as no surprise. It does create, particularly in the Democratic Party, a real challenge for Vice President Kamala Harris, who wants to be the next president, because the pro-Israel lobby and the we'll call them the pro-Arab lobby, for lack of a more artful term, the people who are prominent, who are interested in defending the interests of Arabs and Muslims in the region against what they see as Israeli aggression, has grown stronger. And so that's a very fine line she has to walk. And in states where there is a large Arab American voting population like Michigan, that has created a political problem for her. And so President Biden, if he wants to hand the White House off to her, has to walk a very fine
Rov,
line.
I'll make sure to be back again, but let's welcome Pizzolo and ask him, how do you see the Biden administration's current stance on Iran impacting its relationship with Israel, sir?
Well, first of all, thank you for
It's
inviting
our pleasure,
me.
sir, to have you with us on the show.
We have seen that, generally speaking, Netanyahu's decisions don't necessarily coincide with those of Biden and the Biden administration.
So you don't relate them both to each other, sir?
Sorry?
You do not relate them both to each other?
Okay. Hear me now? Is it better?
Yes, sir. You did not hear me well. Your answer means, sir, how do you see the Biden administration's current stance on Iran impacting its relationship with Israel?
Right. So, as I was saying, we can see that Netanyahu's decision don't necessarily coincide with what are the plans and designs of Biden's administration and his plans for the Middle East and for the crisis that is ongoing. Biden has called several times for a ceasefire and an agreement, whereas, of course, Netanyahu is willing instead to continue his military campaign and may also have full intention to extend the conflict also towards Iran. We'll see how. For the time being, we know
Sir,
that...
sorry to interrupt you, but do you see that at this point that this is taking us into a regional war? Where it's taking place is taking us into a regional war, of course, that could escalate at this point?
Well, to some extent, it's already a regional war that has escalated because Israel has already struck outside Palestine, outside Gaza, and outside West Bank. It has already attacked Lebanon, which is a sovereign country. It has already struck Syria. So it's already a regional conflict. Of course, the problem will be whether Iran will be attacked. In this sense, we'll have to see first how Israel will attack Iran, and if it will attack, we expect a retaliation for sure. But we can go from a minimum that could be a killing of a top official to a maximum that could be bombing, for instance, nuclear sites and so on. And also, how will then Iran respond? Because, of course, Israel has the capacity to attack Iran. Iran may or may not have the capacity to attack Israel.
Why
but
do you
of course,
say that
in the
Iran
long
may
run,
or may
Iran
not,
doesn't
sir?
want full-fledged war with Israel because, of course, the US would intervene. Israel is also unofficially an atomic power. And so, of course, nobody is interested in a long-term, full-fledged regional war. However, it's already a regional war.
Okay, sir. Okay, let's go back to Rov again. Rov, can you hear me well?
I'm sorry, can I what, Iran?
Yes, I was just making sure that you can hear me. How might
Yes, I
the
can.
2024 elections influence U.S.-Israeli relations in the context of foreign policy, especially with Republican nominee Donald Trump encouraging Israel to attack Iranian nuclear sites or facilities? How do you read this?
I think the real issue here in the United States exists among the Democrats. I think that...
Sir, are you a Republican?
Well, I'm just saying that since the Reagan administration, the Republican political constituency has become exceedingly pro-Israel. And so I don't think that they are at all alarmed by what they might think of as saber rattling by Mr. Trump that appears to be in Israel's favor. I think the Republicans also traditionally take a harder line against Iran. For example, the almost universal Republican opposition to the Iranian nuclear deal that was concluded by the Obama administration and that the Biden administration tried to get back on track.
Sir, so it is in the favor of the Middle East that the Democrats take over and Harris becomes the president of the United States, not Donald Trump at this point?
I'm not quite certain I understand what you're asking me.
I'm asking, you said that the Republicans would want Iran action against Iran as soon as possible and against the middle and against what's happening, and you're considering taking action against Iran, whereas Israel are the ones that are taking escalating everything that's going on around the Middle East and in the region, and Israel is escalating all the entire situation. So if this is your point of view, so it is in the favor of the Middle East that Kamala Harris wins and becomes the president of the United States at this point.
I think if Mr. Trump wins another term, I think that your what I understand to be your analysis that the policies will shift more in favor of Israel. I think that's a correct assessment. As I said, Vice President Harris has a much tougher row to hoe. She has to be much more careful in guarding her political flanks here in the United States because the lobbies, the supporters of a pro-Israel policy and a pro-Arab policy, a pro-state-to-state policy, a pro-Palestinian policy. They have not quite, but increasingly powerful influence in the larger political coalition. And she's understanding that. She, for example, met last night with Muslim American activists in Michigan who are threatening to boycott the election because they think that the Biden administration, of which she is part, has been too even-handed and has not done enough to keep tight reins on Prime Minister Netanyahu and to keep the Israelis from escalating their response to what's going on in the region. She is caught in a box there. Michigan is a critical state, is a swing state. The person who wins Michigan is likely to be the person who wins the presidency. So that's the domestic implication.
Okay,
I hope that answers your question.
Rov, could you please give us some time before we continue our discussion? Let's take a look at Biden and the Israeli right wing. Stay with us and we'll be back again with you to continue our discussion, sir. We're back again, and now we are going to be asking Mr. Pizzolo, what are the implications of Israel's military actions in the region for U.S. interests, sir?
Well, of course, this military intervention has huge implications for many actors involved in the region. In the case of the US, obviously the US is in a difficult situation because on one hand, it cannot betray, so to speak, its traditional ally, that is Israel. But on the other hand, of course, the US is in a difficult situation because it's also trying to improve the relations with other regional actors, especially in light of the November elections. For the Democrats, it's obviously very important not to antagonize the Arab world and moreover the Islamic world for reasons that are both internal but also in terms of international relations. For the Republican potential administration, instead, this intervention could anticipate what could be the next policy of the Republican presidency, if there would be one, in relation to the Middle East, a reinforcement of Israel and maybe a showdown with Iran. In this case, I think that there will be a big difference in November when we will see who will be the next president. But for now, the situation is very complex for Biden's administration because it's caught in between a situation that it's dramatic if we add all the problems that the US is already facing in other scenarios.
Who do you see, sir, in favor of the Middle East and the escalation in the Middle East at this point? Best Donald Trump or Kamala Harris?
Well, it depends from the point of view of which we want to describe the situation. Obviously, if we want to see a two-state solution between Israel and Palestine, then the best solution would be to have most likely a democratic administration. Although, of course, there are many complex issues even there. Otherwise, it would have already been there. Instead, if we want to have perhaps a lesser threat coming from Iran, then perhaps a Republican administration could end this threat, this perceived threat that Israel has in relation to Iran, maybe also considering a potential military intervention. Today, Trump spoke very clearly that he would not exclude the possibility of striking Iranian nuclear sites. This is in line with what Netanyahu would like to carry out. And so, of course, from the point of view of Benjamin Netanyahu's center-right government, or right government, a Republican presidency in the US would be the best solution. For the Palestinians, of course, a democratic government will be the lesser evil.
Okay, we move on to Mr. Rove. How does the current US administration view the right-wing government in Israel, sir?
I think the current administration views the government as an impediment. There were reports over the series of elections that Israel just went through of U.S. political operatives associated with the American Democratic Party who were in Israel trying to ensure a different outcome than the re-election of Mr. Netanyahu as the head of the government. I do think they find it an impediment. I think that they understand that Mr. Netanyahu is not interested in a two-state solution. I think that, in fairness, that the proponents of the two-state solution here in the United States have not done a good enough job selling it to the American people, of explaining to the American people why it would be the start of a lasting peace, why an independent Palestinian state that included both the West Bank and Gaza would put an end to the violence, to the deaths of innocent civilians, of women and children on both sides. I think it has become, unfortunately, a political talking point rather than a real option. It's something for people to say that they're for, at least in the American
Sir, in 10
political
seconds, because we have to wrap up this episode, could you tell me, please, what you want to say?
I'm sorry, say again?
In 10 seconds, please, sir, what do you have to say?
that I do think that the proponents of the two-state option need to do a much better job selling it to the American people to get the administration, the American administration, whoever it is, behind it.
Okay, that was Peter Rove, political columnist for Newsweek, and Paolo Pizzolo, professor of international relations. Thank you both for your insights.
Thank you. It's been a
Thank you,
pleasure.
sir. President Biden's attempts to navigate a fraught landscape reveal a struggle for influence amid rising Israeli assertiveness. With domestic pressure mounting and the specter of elections looming, the United States finds itself at a crossroads. Will Biden adapt his approach to align more closely with shifting Israeli strategies, or will he assert American priorities? The answers lie in the evolving dynamics of partnership that has long shaped the geopolitical landscape. The coming weeks will be pivotal in determining the future of the US-Israeli relations. Thank you very much for watching In Depth, and this brings us to the end of today's episode. Stay tuned for more coming up here on Qnews. Goodbye.